Welcome to the AWS for AI podcast.
Welcome to AWS for AI, the podcast where we explore cutting-edge AI solutions and the innovators behind them. I'm your host, Hamza Mimi, Solution Architect at AWS. And today, I'm thrilled to welcome Philip Kingston, Chief Technology Officer at Applied AI. Philip brings a unique combination of technical innovation and entrepreneurial vision to our conversation. With over 2 decades in tech as a founder, CEO, and CTO across financial services, cybersecurity, and AI, Philip has built an impressive career developing breakthrough technologies that solve complex business challenges. In his role as CTO of Applied AI, he's leading the development of Opus, the world's first large work model that's reimagining the whole agentic workflow architecture. While large language models predict the next word, Opus and large work models predicts the next action. Philip and Applied AI have recently published fascinating research demonstrating how Opus is able to understand workflow intentions and integrates multimodal inputs with work knowledge graphs to create more effective, auditable, and optimized workflow. And overall, optimize the business processes in a way that's significantly outperforming conventional approaches. Philip, it's a pleasure to have you with us today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Hamza. Great to meet you and great to be here.
Let me start with your personal journey. What brought you to join Applied AI and here in the UAE?
Yeah, thank you. So my personal journey, as you've said, I've spent many years looking at startups from the perspective of regulated industries. So I've always been fascinated with technology adoption and absorption inside the enterprise, which has unique challenges compared to more consumer-facing technology. So post-COVID, like a lot of people, was thinking about kind of what's next. The impact that had on the world was profound. And I was sitting in Australia. I was born in Melbourne, in the south of Australia.
Real Aussie.
Real Aussie, that's right. And I got a call out of the blue late 2021 from a friend of mine, Arya Baluf Roshan, that I'd known for many years in business endeavors that had taken me to New York and parts of the US, where I met Arya and became good friends probably over 15 years. And so I got a call from him and he was telling me what he was doing in artificial intelligence. And the whole problem space that he had defined and the opportunity that he was pursuing was extremely ambitious. It involved regulated industries and cutting edge technology. So I was deeply fascinated. So I was following the journey from afar, from Melbourne. And eventually I started advising the business a few days a week, and then became full-time, moved to the UAE in late 2022 and haven't looked back. It's a big change. It's a bit different to Melbourne, but now coming up to 3 years. No. Very, very pleased that I made the move to be part of an extremely rare moment, the rise of a new technology power in the UAE. And based in Abu Dhabi. We now live in Yas Island, which is just an incredible part of the world. Absolutely. So very, very pleased I made the move.
So this was before the generative AI era. What was the attracting thing that brought you actually in what Arya told you? Is it the regulated industry, the challenge, the AI part?
I mean, a whole lot of factors made it appealing. The scale of the ambition, obviously, that even pre-generative AI, the sort of ChatGPT, OpenAI moment of late 2022 that really changed, I suppose, the public consciousness of what was happening for many years beforehand. Was a catalyst, of course. But yes, this was all pre sort of the public understanding of the LLM. And I think the ambition was really looking at why is it that large organizations struggle to adopt technology still? Mm-hmm. And given the significance of AI as profound on productivity as electricity, as the wheel and fire, we're talking about a foundational moment in history. How was an organization or a government organization going to consume artificial intelligence? Not at the individual user level, not at the, say, the data science teams or the sort of technology part of the organizations, but holistically, where the organization is the customer, is the user, as opposed to users using AI to make their own productivity greater. And it's quite a different conversation. Getting sort of an artificial intelligence solution to the point where the organization can govern it, adopt it everywhere holistically, and understand it, have it be auditable, explainable, keeping all the decision points, immutably forever.
Absolutely.
And what is unique about regulated industries and why we sort of go on about this is that the fundamental difference with a regulated organization is that the process, the procedure is often as important, often more important than the outcome. And so there's a sort of general division in the world about goal-seeking AI that gets the right answer as quickly as possible. The sort of wow magic moment of, okay, wow, how did you know that? That's great. That's amazing. And the procedural inherent nature of the requirements of an organization, which is we need to do this process the same way every single time, no exceptions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can relate that to the diffusion of innovation theory from Everett Rogers, where you're working in the area where you need to actually get to that early adopters majority and bypass that chasm.
Yes.
In regulated industry. That's probably something that you see every day with your customers.
Yeah,
right?
there's a I suppose a tension between speed of adoption, top-down pressure. We need to be doing something in AI. What's our AI plan?
Yeah.
What's our AI strategy? And this will be a perpetual discussion as the capabilities improve, the scope of business functions that can be improved grows and grows and over time. This is not like a one moment in time situation where these questions are being asked. I think a lot of knowledge work is up for grabs in terms of how it's performed, what share of the work is done by a system versus a human. And the default position now is sort of 2025 timeline is what percentage is done by human and AI, which is, a profoundly different position than 3 years ago, which is can AI do any of this stuff? And then, 3 years from now, we'll probably be asking different questions.
Absolutely. Just to touch on your personal story again, you're the CTO of Applied AI, but you're also doing research work. You're a professor of AI. How do you balance with the current state where you need to learn about the AI technology and apply it, and the operational work as a CTO of a startup that's becoming actually a multinational now?
Yeah, I mean it's a difficult one. What's unique about, I think, AI as a manager compared to regular software is the deterministic versus probabilistic nature of things. So most software people, they know what a bug is. They know that there are problems in the system. But when you press run, your code will do, more or less the same thing every single time. There are edge cases. There are problems in design and problems in execution for sure. But the core of the software is a deterministic beast. And the people that have grown up around software, who write software for a living, who work in the software industry, are very much like deterministic in their mindset. And the level of theory that permeates their work is typically related to algorithms and computer science type issues that are still deterministic in nature. What's different about sort of bleeding edge, state-of-the-art artificial intelligence work, and in fact, all new blended areas of software and AI as products which may have started as a transformer architecture model are becoming holistic software solutions, doing many, many more things than just model inference. What's unique about this challenge is you have to blend theory and kind of fairly high-order mathematics with a lot of probability and statistics that's fundamentally not deterministic. And the sorts of people that have grown up around and are experienced in this world generally are different types of animals to the people that work in pure play software. And so a academic research organization and a sort of fast-paced software culture is a difficult thing to put together. But it's one of the things that is necessary in a modern AI organization. And we're fortunate enough to have some very experienced researchers and innovative young people, it's, looking at things with fresh eyes across the whole problem space of knowledge work completion, where you have these constraints of process and procedural adherence. And so most of our research work is in trying to represent a workflow mathematically in a robust way that scales to the sort of corpus of knowledge work in large organizations. But we have to be able to instantiate this as software that you can deploy, and you can deal with all sorts of security, access control, and governance, and all the data elements that also is a relatively new field. So the use of data was a problem obviously tackled from a storage and cloud infrastructure kind of standpoint for since the birth of any kind of internet connectivity. But now the new uses of data around training, validation, drift, all the sort of ongoing model assessments, these kind of things, the different user groups, the amount of user groups that sit around the data conversation now is significantly higher than it used to be. And so it is really a three-party conversation. There's the software piece, the AI theory and research piece, and the data governance, controls, and cyber and operational security piece, which is equally important. And there's just tension everywhere. And the ambition of what people want, the practicalities of doing it, and working around all those constraints makes for a fascinating internal team culture, but also with client deployments and client adoption, all those conversations are happening in really all businesses around the world. Yeah. Those trade-offs between what can be done, what we'd like to be able to do, and the necessary constraints that are placed on those businesses by the regulations that are imposed.
And I can imagine those would take fascinating day-to-day schedules as well from your side.
Yes.
Let's touch to some extent to Applied AI's vision. What's the mission behind Applied AI? You've already touched on Aria's initial vision, but what's the company's mission and some of the current work that you were touching on?
Yeah, so I think the AI opportunity is still in its infancy, and some of the questions that we're trying to tackle with software solutions is, how does a modern organization consume human labor? So going from the default to the blended labor supply model, where AI is doing a part of the work, humans are doing a part of the work. This is an extremely important distinction in goal function. We are not trying to replace humans. And notice I unitize the conversation on work completion. It's not about having less humans or more humans. It's about saying per unit of work, and Opus is Latin for work, and it has beautiful deployments in music and other historic moments where Opus is a term which has just great associations that we draw upon for naming products and naming parts of our ecosystem, which we'll come back to. It's really looking at the future of work and saying, what is, as a goal function, the best way to use humans based on their capabilities, and what is the best ways to use AI with its capabilities. And each have constraints. Some need sleep. Some don't need sleep. Some get tired. Some don't. The ways in which they can deal with uncertainty, policy discovery, edge cases, is different. So it's sort of almost like a discussion about compromise and building the best team of work deployment delivery capabilities. And this makes the software design principles a little bit different, because it's not saying have a human review when the work is done. And that's a naive and not a bad first approximation. No. But a much better way to think about this is, what are all the points that we have to get right in a workflow such that the total cost of human input is minimized, the overall productivity of the workflow is maximized. But noting that AI is also not free, right? There's compute, there's inference, there's a whole lot of energy infrastructure that sits around it that doesn't go away.
Absolutely.
So it's about where are all the right places to put the humans and the AI against these cost functions.
So to just go a level deeper into the idea about not replacing humans but enhancing their capabilities, is this a technical constraint that we're not able to replace humans, or do you think that at some point there is a deeper philosophical perspective where we actually need humans in the loop?
I think the answer is both. There's certain areas where this sort of socio-technological intersection is hard to model, like autopilots in civilian aviation. Most people accept that AI is capable of doing all the things it needs to be able to do to fly a plane, but we still have pilots, and we're likely to have pilots for some time. However, the same technical challenge of driving a train, say between airport terminals, people are very happy for the intra-terminal train to be self-driving
I
with
love,
no human supervision.
I love the image there. We're building very sophisticated planes that are capable of doing everything, but we still need that pilot to actually drive everything and make sure that it still works.
That's right. And humans are probably irrational in this regard. There's no sort of intrinsic safety or probability argument that will defend why we're comfortable with full automation here and not there. And that's okay. We don't have to solve that. But I think it's about identifying where does an organizational risk profile sit. And not all work in an organization is created equal. We are an enterprise artificial intelligence company. We have different standards because we're trying to work within regulated industry constraints.
Absolutely.
But for a consumer application where you just want, a good restaurant recommendation, or you want something to be summarized just to save you time in doing some quick research on something you're interested in, it just doesn't matter as much. So we also think that human acceptance of AI as the leader and potentially, fully unsupervised, that the aperture of acceptance of that is going to grow dramatically over time. So what we now think is acceptable for an AI to do, I think will change.
Okay. Just want to go back to Applied AI as a company for those of watching us that don't know about Applied AI as a company. What can you tell them about where it started, where it is now, and what are you seeing in the near future?
Absolutely. So we started in late 2021 solving what we would now call vertical AI solutions. At that time, domain-specific models generally outperformed general models. And you would do things like pre-train a model, not fine-tune, but actually train on a domain around a very specific need. And 9 times out of 10, that would be a better result than a general model.
Yeah.
Now, this has changed in late 2022. And so I suppose, market conditions on the demand side have started asking questions about, well, if general models are very good, why don't we have general products and platform solutions? And I suppose some latency in the VC and capital markets that still believe that vertical solutions are the best answer, which is a relic of the SaaS world. But AWS, for example, is a cloud infrastructure solution for all industries. You don't say, we don't do this, we only do that, right? You say, well, anything that we can support with a capability is an industry we can work within. So we started in healthcare, doing first product was called DeepDoc, and it was about assisting independent medical evaluations where in a contested insurance claim, you would have someone would make a claim to say, I've been injured at work. Here are my injuries. This is the hospital care that I received. And I want to claim that on my workers' compensation. Now, a certain percentage of the time, the insurer will say, that's fine, here it is, paid, done. Other percentage of the time, they'll say, no, injury didn't happen at work, or you were over-serviced, you didn't need all of this, you got some other procedure done at the same time that isn't covered, this kind of thing. And so sometimes there's conflict around whether a claim should be paid. And so this industry is called claims adjustment, generally, globally. So we built solutions to review large amounts of claim documentation. Often a contested claim is one which has gone on for some time. Maybe an injury's taken a long time to recover. Maybe there's been litigation in the past or some legal contest in the past. So you'll have a lot of documents, thousands, tens of thousands of pages of material. And the people that can review that to make insurance decisions are expensive, usually. So we have a high cost of labor, and we need to summarize and organize that material in a way that's easy for them to consume to effectively make claims adjustment decisions in a very, very short amount of time. And this industry also values independence, because before anyone litigates around insurance claims, both sides will obtain a medical expert who will give a sense of the different perspectives that a judge or a jury might take on a particular claim context. So having an independent AI assessment to say, well, I've looked at all the materials with no agenda, I'm not on anyone's side, and this is what I think is the medical basis of this claim. That's also valuable as an independent voice in decision-making on both sides. So this solution is used by plaintiff attorneys and potential plaintiffs to evaluate the probability of success and some of the key medical issues. And it's used on the defense, from the insurance company side, to say, well, should we pay or defend this claim or settle?
Absolutely.
So that's where we started. And we moved into a range of other deeply niche and boring problems like this, where they're regulated, they have high stakes, mission critical decisions. So there's a high cost of error. What we say, what is the cost of error? And we try to focus on use cases that have a high cost of error, because that's usually where there's a high willingness to pay and also high cost of existing incumbent labor. So the business case makes a lot of sense because there's a lot of money in play. If you can save someone's time, who's expensive, then obviously there are high business outcomes. So another example, just for completeness, is we went into the pharmaceutical industry, where we wanted to look at, in clinical trials, drugs that make it through ultimately get licensed by certain drug regulators. And once they're licensed, there's a whole new regime of oversight that starts, that's typically referred to as pharmacovigilance. And it's a largely self-reported regime where pharmaceutical companies need to monitor all of the drugs that are licensed, that they've produced, to make sure that those drugs are adequately described on their packaging and their labels, that the medical industry is using them in the right way, and that if there's, for example, a new side effect that's emerging, maybe that didn't show up in trials because of some diversity that was missed or other drug combinations that were missed, then that can be captured, and the industry can then adapt to say, well, we need to put an extra warning label, don't take while pregnant or don't take while operating heavy machinery or something like this, update the warning label to provide more information, update the medical education provided to the pharmacists and the physicians that are prescribing these drugs. And so, as you can imagine, there is an enormous amount of literature produced every day on side effect reports, on medical studies at universities, on public health bodies that are producing science often, or at least medical case studies that need to be reviewed. So this is an enormous amount of material to consume globally, and we cover all countries, all major languages. So we consume this and we find insights that say, well, there is a pattern emerging in Japan where this combination of drugs is causing this issue, and then we can work with the companies that make those drugs to decide on sort of what happens next. So, that was our second domain, which we call Covigilance, is our product, and that's become a huge success for us. But this is our legacy. We see this as a happy moment between 2021 and 2024. But we've totally changed our model now with the birth of Opus.
So you've been, and you touched on the healthcare industry in general, pharmaceutical. You've also worked in finance and banking with what you now refer to as legacy solutions.
Yes.
What are some of the challenges that you've seen in highly regulated industries importing new technologies in general, and AI in particular? This is a regular discussion we're having with AWS customers as well. What are the expectations that you're hearing from your customers in highly regulated industries to get those first solutions implemented?
Yeah, there's a whole range of issues that are faced by decision makers in sort of regulated enterprises. One of the sort of other side of the coin of the vertical, our legacy, say, product suite, and the way a lot of people approach this problem over the sort of 2021, 2022 period, is you end up with point solutions where an organization is buying good AI, but from a lot of vendors.
Yeah.
And so as AI increases its sphere of influence on the types of knowledge work that it can help, the conclusion is a lot of point solutions. And this is something that creates a lot of risk and a lot of cost. And what we found with studying other adoption cycles of technology, for example, the major system of record companies tend to have a lot of consolidation within an organization. So you don't want to have a lot of systems of record if you can avoid it. You typically want one or a small number of systems of record. And we think this is what's happening right now in the enterprise AI industry, where people have done a lot of proof of concepts. They've got some great point solutions. But the conversations that we're having at the director level or the executive level is, I don't want to have 500 AI point solutions. I can't govern this. I can't manage this. Each one wants to get, access to data warehouses. They want to get access to, compute infrastructure, maybe for fine tuning on specific, organizational data. We just can't govern this.
Yes.
And there's a whole cybersecurity conversation as well around having too many things. It's risky. So we think that the platform approach is the right approach, but it's a big ask of an organization to adopt a platform in the early days of AI where things are still changing so quickly.
Absolutely.
So what I think the answer is to be able to start with a point solution, prove value, prove capability, and then be able to effectively back into a platform solution. So saying that another way, having the point solution, which takes risk off the table, as one workflow on a system that can deploy thousands or hundreds of thousands of workflows for that organization.
Okay. So your vision is we're moving out from the vertical solutions to horizontal solutions, and you touch a bit about on the verticals that you've been working on legacy and now moving to Opus. What can you tell us about the challenge that poses using horizontal solutions now, and the Opus as an example, the Opus platform that's basically answering multiple use cases in the same platform?
Yes, so there's opportunity and there's complexity.
Yeah.
So the opportunity is, if you build an integration to a system of record, it's reusable generally. So you go through all the effort of doing the data governance lift, getting everyone's approvals, doing the integration. But now that unlocks value for many different users across the organization. And interdisciplinary work is another reason that motivates a horizontal solution, because sometimes you'll have a document or a workflow that is only worked on by one skill set. So it might be a legal document where top to bottom, it's only lawyers looking at that. It's only in the legal department. No one else cares. They do exist, but that's probably rarer than workflows that actually interrelate or at least involve other disciplines. Of maybe we need accounting, maybe we need audit, maybe we need marketing or design. So any workflow which is working across disciplines in an organization is something that a vertical solution will struggle with. And the other thing on the supply side, so I've been talking a lot about demand side, the challenges on the enterprise, but you've got to look at the supply side. The majority of our competition is not AI companies. It's business process outsourcing companies. It's the sort of tail end of the private equity era, where it was extremely sensible in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s to outsource work that was repetitive, that could be codified, to markets that had lower average cost of labor, time zone advantages, lower cost of living, etc., you could basically create financial performance by doing it the same way, just in a different place. And this was an extremely successful period that the internet enabled with email and then more sophisticated solutions to actually pass this work around. Enabled follow the sun. It also enabled lower costs. Now, the BPO companies are the biggest competitor right now to platform AI adoption. Okay. Because they don't say no, generally, to new work. If a client says, hey, you're currently doing this, this, and this for us, can you also do this? Any sensible BPO would say, absolutely, we do that. When can we start? And when you're in the vertical land, you're saying, well, we don't do that. And to spin up engineering and product to pivot or take that on is an enormous lift.
So this is still a very active discussion about the horizontal versus the vertical, and still having the vision from some of the vertical builders about specific solutions that they still think that are the best way forward. And you mentioned about some of these use cases, but you also make a distinction between solutions versus platforms. So what's the distinctions here between a solution and a platform?
Different people have different views on this. The way I look at it is who's in charge of the scope of the software. So in a platform solution, the user and the organization is sort of free to decide what it does and doesn't do. Adjust quite not just settings within a solution, like maybe temperature of a model or something like this, but actually design sort of the whole application logic. And I think the sort of product land is typically more focused on, they will preordain the value proposition and have a much more certain outcome, but with a narrower sort of scope of deployment.
Excellent. You touched on the enterprise AI new realm. And I also want to move a bit to talk about Opus now, which is your new platform solution. What do you think Opus is bringing that we are not able to have before that?
I mean, there's a lot of things that we see as totally differentiated in what Opus is bringing to the table. The first thing is on workflow generation. So many people, when asked to automate a process, will recreate what they have now. Okay. And they'll do a good job of that. And any RPA, like robotic process automation tool, or any workflow builder will allow you to recreate the status quo. So add conditionals, if this, do this, add loops, drop in an agent, drop in an LLM, drop in this. Like, this is par for the course, and there are great people that do that. What we're trying to solve is, what is the AI impression of that workflow? What is the new way of doing this that maybe leverages capabilities that you may not fully understand, that leverages model strengths and weaknesses that you may not understand, that is also future forward, that is somehow evolving with the underlying improvements? So if a model vendor introduces new capability, how do you stay current without having to go through an entire redesign process? So this whole discipline of flexible design time, where a workflow can be built with a whole lot of support from, in our case, a work knowledge graph, which is a 100 million node graph, knowledge graph, that we host in AWS, that stores every distilled, documented process that we've been able to find in sort of the world's literature on knowledge work process. So we formalized what a workflow is. We formalized what intention is. And we applied those formalisms to the corpora of documents globally. Everything that talks about a business process, we've codified, structured, interpreted into an Opus framework. We store it in our knowledge graph, and we use that with our large work model to design workflows on the fly with no business context that represent two things. One, the sort of AI-inspired, AI-era version of that workflow that will be cost-efficient, highly accurate, save the most amount of time, put human reviews in all the right places.
So Opus basically is trying to solve that complex organizational processes that are sometimes well-defined, sometimes are less well-defined. And I just want to dive a bit deeper on the technical aspects and some of the research papers that you published. So you already touched on the graph concept, but you also define what you call workflow intention. Can you talk a bit about what's a workflow intention in the Opus framework?
Yeah. So an intention to us is a triple of input, process, and output. It's incredibly simple. It's telescopic, so it works at the whole of workflow level. So what do I want this workflow to do? What constitutes a good workflow generation? And this is really where this formalism was required, because we'd both say, in Opus, you can just write a prompt, you can describe it using a voice memo. Basically, you can just upload a picture of a process. We take a lot of inputs. It's a multimodal system. Yeah. So you throw at us some description that can be structured or unstructured of a workflow, and then we will produce as executable code that can be deployed into an enterprise environment within minutes, an end-to-end workflow that does what? And the answer is it does your intention. What constitutes the right workflow based on the information you have given us? So we force a resolution of the unstructured multimodal inputs into an intention object, but also sometimes multiple intention objects. And so sometimes people will describe something that is much better suited as 2 workflows or 5 workflows. Or it might be the other way, where actually the workflow is too simple. And to use our parlance, it's actually just a task inside a workflow. So we need to think about workflow intention to resolve working within context window limits and a whole lot of technical limitations. If a workflow is, say, a whole of business, like, do a bank for me as a workflow, it's too big to really deal with in the context of sort of one workflow. So there's an extreme side, but then there's also, and this is where there's a whole product solution space, is something that's too small to be a workflow, which is something that should be really just a task. Like summarize this document for me. To us, that's a task. That's something that is valuable because it sits inside a broader process which delivers value to an organization. It's not an end in and of itself.
So when you are working with large enterprises, they have multiple organizational processes, and some are well-defined, some are in the heads of the employees, some are in an email I read 3 years ago. How does Opus define the different workflow intentions and get that maybe missing information that is crucial to that workflow?
Yeah, so we start with the English language and we say, well, how many words are there that describe the input to a workflow? There's actually only a few thousand ways to think about what would kick off a workflow. It could be a payslip, it could be a passport, it could be a driver's license, it could be really any document that you would pass to someone else that you would send via email. If you think about classifying them against a simple classifier and saying, what type of document is this? That list is not that large. Likewise on the output. Sometimes you'll get the same type on the way out as you put in the way in, but it might be improved somehow. Sometimes you'll get an entirely different type of document. You could put in a passport in a workflow that's looking at, passport tampering or like KYC validation type use case in a bank. The output of that workflow is just true or false, with tampered or non-tampered, with a probability. So when we study this at length, we're able to then formulate these as graphs and say, well, here are all the possible inputs, here are all the possible outputs. We do this in 150 countries, but it's simplest to think about in English. These are the input-output space. what are all the ways that I can get from those inputs to those outputs? Which in mathematics is just a function or a transformation that takes me from A to B.
And how do you make sure that you actually detected all the good intentions? What's basically your loss function to stop?
So the intention is really a projection onto these spaces. So we're basically saying, based on this user query, which can be structured or unstructured, what is the most likely input that would... So if an input is formally mentioned, for example, I have a passport, I want to do a KYC process. In that scenario, someone has described the input.
Yes.
We just have to find it. But if they omit that part and they just say, I want to do a KYC process in a bank in Saudi Arabia, then we don't know explicitly what the input is. And that's where the knowledge graph is very useful. Okay. So we project what we do have onto the process space. We find processes that we have in our knowledge graph that talk about KYC, Saudi Arabia, which is what we do know from the user query. We then follow the edges around nodes that show up against that embedding of the intention. Then we can just traverse the graph to find input nodes and output nodes that are attached to what we do know. Sometimes we'll only get an input from the user query. Sometimes we'll get only an output. Sometimes we'll get all three. And usually, as long as we get 2 out of 3, the probability is extremely high that we'll be able to find the third. And once we have the third, then it's just a case of finding workflows that have been documented in all of time, basically, because we have an enormous knowledge graph that have embodied this workflow intention. And then it comes to, how do we make sure this is the most AI forward way of doing something? And there's a whole optimization pipeline that takes the candidates, which are subgraphs. How do we study the subgraphs, find the lowest cost, highest accuracy, fastest time, and has the human reviews in the minimum, but in all the right places to sum total the human cost as low as possible. So as a multi-step and multi-dimensional kind of optimization that we're doing on those workflow candidates, so that when we present to our user our magic moment of, here is the workflow that you had in your head, that they're both incredibly impressed that we're able to do that off such a small query. But then we're never perfect, because there'll always be some localization, some idiosyncratic part in their organization. Yeah. So we're not pretending that you can just put that straight into production. You could technologically, it works as executable code. But usually there will be some alignment, say, oh, well, we don't do that here, or we do this extra step here. And that's totally fine. So when we move out of the workflow generation pipelines, we move into the workflow builder. And that's a drag and drop. It allows people to pick their model preferences. So they can say, oh, I don't want to use this model, I want to use that model. They can use their own models from their organization. If they've got their own model that might perform better on a specific task. They can change model settings. They can delete steps. They can add steps. They can add human reviews. They can remove human reviews. They can also use our expert cloud. So one of our points of view on the future of work is that the labor structure is likely to change in the same way an Uber changed the nature of the way people consume driving services and the relationship between drivers, cars, and the consumer. We think that the relationship of knowledge work is going to change fundamentally with their employers. And so the need to have, if you look at the way that BPO changed things and any kind of offshoring and outsourcing, it changed the paradigm from all of the workers are in the office every day to, well, some of them don't come in at all and they actually live in a different country. But they're still on our payroll in sort of the captive BPO company. And then it's like, actually, it's fully outsourced. They don't even work for us at all. They're just contractors. And we think there is a new gig economy version of this within knowledge work, which is highly, small, discrete protein work that should be done by humans, is done off payroll, not contractors, not BPO companies. It's just gig work where someone can sit at home who is qualified, and we monitor sort of everything that they're doing to ensure standards of quality and make sure that no one's looking at their screen, that it's actually them at the computer, all of these sort of biometric controls and and environmental controls. But there is no reason why a human review of a workflow can't be done in a gig economy kind of way. And this is plays to the human strengths, gives them more flexibility. And for people that want to work harder, want to do longer hours, they can. If they want to do less hours, that's great. They can as well.
So basically, Opus is you bring in a new employee that have seen massive amount of processes and have massive experience in multiple domains.
Yes.
That you can just rely on, but given limited amount of information about your specific context.
Yeah, and you can have no human reviews if you want. You can have some. You can have them with internal employees, external contractors or BPO companies, or you can use our expert cloud and not have any employees. And it's not for us to decide how people want to use it, but as a solution, it supports everything so that we can both hedge the different future of work possibilities that are coming through. And not all countries are going to go the same way. Countries have taken drastically different positions on regulation, and this will play out on, how labor is protected or not in different countries around the world. And so we want to make sure as a platform we've built for all conceivable futures for the relationship, the evolving relationship of labor with the organization.
I want to touch on how you actually built this solution, this platform. Obviously, you're a AWS customer. You've worked with AWS solutions, and just want to touch on the architecture level. What services have you used for Opus, and what infrastructure is involved here?
Yeah. So we use almost everything that's available within AWS. So on our workflows, we think about there's sort of two main pipelines. There's workflow generation, which is finding the intention, helping them design the workflow, a whole lot of suggestions on what tasks they should add or subtract and where they should put human reviews and not. So that is all sits inside an EKS, a managed Kubernetes cluster inside AWS. And that also contains our knowledge graphs, our vector databases in Vespa. We use Neo4j on the graph side. We use OpenSearch. We're using a whole lot of relational databases, managed and unmanaged RDSs and Postgres, vanilla, etc. So we have all the databases generally inside the Kubernetes for the workflow generation side. And we, often will start with a managed service just because it's faster. And then when it becomes higher priority to fine tune or optimize, we'll move out of the managed service into the sort of more directly managed, which is something that's great about AWS. And then on our workflow execution side, this is where it gets very interesting. So once a workflow is built and the customer is happy, the compliance is signed off, or whatever checks they have internally are all passed, they want to now start running the workflow. Design time's over. Let's run it 50,000 times an hour. So we do a lot of very high use workflows. So we now need to deploy it. So some customers are very happy for it to stay in the public cloud. So we just align with an availability zone that works for them. The majority of our workflow execution is Lambdas and an ECS. Okay. So we have every task in a workflow is Dockerized and sits in the registry, the ECR. And so everything in the knowledge graph, every node is attached a code base. Okay. So we can run those code bases by just spinning up an instance in the ECS and then calling it with our defined input, process, output sort of schema. And it just runs.
And it scales automatically.
Scales automatically. No one has to think about anything. It just works. So when a customer says, so often you'll have CTOs, CIOs wanting a lot of control over what the organization can consume in the workflows. So they set up their ECR and pull our task containers, our images, into their ECR for everything that they allow their employees to use. So if they have an integration, they can also do custom tasks. If they have an integration with a legacy system, they write that integration once, and then workflow generation can use that integration in any workflow inside that organization. But let's say governance doesn't want a public model being called. Maybe they just want to use Bedrock. Maybe they want to use only internal models. Maybe they only want to use one external vendor. So they will restrict which tasks are available based on what models that they're running inference on. So there's like a universe of allowed task that's created as a whitelist inside companies that have more strict requirements. And we deploy all of those Docker images into the client ECR. And then they just run inside the client managed cloud.
So from your perspective, building these solutions on AWS, I want you to touch on the good, the bad, and the ugly. If I'm a startup just starting a project on AWS and they want to build the next new AI solution or platform, what learnings would you share with the new builders?
Yeah, so I think having a managed service and an unmanaged service of almost everything is a great strength of AWS. Because if a startup is not going to be a domain expert in absolutely everything. They'll have some things that are extremely important for that startup, but maybe a billing system's not that important. Maybe the account login's not that important. Maybe they don't need to have fine-grained controls over certain things at this point. So just use a managed service. It works straight away. You don't need to know anything, and you can get up and running. And for the stuff that's really important to you, or that you use a lot of, where the managed services might be more expensive, or you want to have more controls, then you move into the unmanaged. And so we've done this a lot. We start usually with a managed, unless it's extremely important to us, and then we'll move to the unmanaged over time. And so, you've got this pattern within technology decision makers where, there's this tension within IT and CTOs and CIOs where they don't want to be a blocker. They don't want to stop the adoption of innovation in their organization. They want to unblock people. They want to enable people. They don't want to be a gatekeeper, but they so often are seen as gatekeepers because everyone's waiting, I need IT to do this integration, or I'm waiting for this data access request to be approved. So what we wanted to do is remove as much friction as possible for CTOs. We see ourselves, Opus is the CTO enablement company. Anyone who has an idea for a workflow, you don't need to procure a system. You don't need to do a point solution. You don't need to do any new integrations. You do it once, then it's available to everyone that you want to have it available for. Workflows can be infinitely creative. The people closest to the problem who have the operational knowledge to design that workflow are now unencumbered from having to wait for an integration to happen or wait for an IT backlog to get through. And it's very difficult because there's a lot of people demanding things of IT. And we've found that the ability to client deploy through AWS means that these technology leaders can have all the controls, observability. They can see everything that everyone is doing. They can have all the controls that they want. We use CloudWatch. We've got Grafana UIs across Prometheus. We're grabbing all sorts of information and making it available to the internal technology leaders. But they can move from gatekeepers to enablers of sales, of operations, back office. And they're now everyone's best friend because they're no longer slowing down the adoption of AI in the organization. They get greater observability and greater control than they have from shadow procurement, shadow IT happening. And so this is where all the AWS tooling just shines because it's totally differentiated on allowing the organization to consume very, very sort of innovative solutions, not getting in the way, but keeping those controls in place for technology leadership.
Maybe my final question is, and we could probably talk here more for hours. How do you see the future of AI beyond 2025? Are you expecting some trends that will revolutionize how we do specific things? Or do you see any specific coming in that you're already working on?
I think we're still in the very, very early days, and it's hard to predict. What we know for certain is that, intelligence per unit of cost is going to grow. So you'll get more efficiency from LLMs over time. You'll also get more varieties. At the moment, there's kind of a small language model, a large language model division of the world. And there's going to be a whole mosaic of things in the middle for specific needs. there's going to be a lot more inference. The total inference in the world is going to grow exponentially, and products are going to use more and more inference everywhere. So it will not be unusual to have multiple models running at the same time on edge devices, on IoT, on OT, on anything. There's just going to be AI absolutely everywhere. And the cost of that compute is going to keep diminishing. So this means for startups, for founders, we're at the start of this, not at the end of this. And it's going to be an extremely exciting next few years.
Thank you very much. It was a very nice discussion today. And I hope we keep this discussion going on for the next years. Thank you, Philip.
Thank you.
So that brings us to the end of today's fascinating episode of AWS for AI. The work that Philip and the Applied AI team are doing truly represents the next frontier in how AI can transform business operations. If you're interested in learning more about Applied AI and the Opus platform, you can find links in our show notes along with resources for exploring the AWS services that supports the innovation that Applied AI is doing. Don't forget to subscribe to AWS for AI on your favorite podcast platform. And please leave us a review if you enjoyed today's conversation. Your feedback helps us bring cutting-edge discussions with AI innovators. Until next time, this is Hamza Mimi, thanking you for listening. Keep exploring, keep innovating, and we'll catch you on your next episode.